Yo, what's up, everybody? So this is just, I'm not going to make another update video. This is just an update to an update is what I'm going to call it. There are so many people, I mean, this video's been up for like 3 years now, and it's got a couple thousand comments, I think. There's so many people that don't know about muskrat trapping and what it all entails, because I see so many people commenting. They're like, hey, you are on his property because you're digging into the shoreline. I am not digging into the shoreline at all. Um, Anybody can Google muskrat trapping, and you'll see that I am in fact digging into huts that are made out of cattails and weeds and other materials, and these muskrats build these huts, and they build them on the water, and they essentially, they're connected to the bottom of the lake, through buildings. They build them up. A lot of muskrat houses actually float on top of the water like push-ups. Some muskrat houses, they wait until they get some ice, and then when we get a little bit of ice, they just build the hut through a small hole in the ice. But these huts, in fact, do not touch the shoreline. They're they are part of the body of the water. Shoreline would be, solid ground, solid dirt that is, the shoreline itself. Also, I see people saying, he owns the bottom of the lake, and that's true. He pays taxes on the bottom of the lake, and everybody else does. But in the law books, it's or Minnesota DNR law, because I see a lot of people commenting, within this state this is how it goes, or this state or that state this is how it goes. In fact, here in Minnesota, it states that you can do any recreational activity you want down there: fishing, hunting, trapping, so on and so forth, on the body of water, as long as the body of water is large enough to float a canoe. So I mean, I could. So if there was a pond the size of my living room and I could get my canoe in it, that literally means I could fish on that pond. And it says regardless of who owns the bottom of the lake. So in this instance, I was not touching the shoreline in any shape or form. Like, I probably get 5 comments a day where people say, hey, you're touching the shoreline. I'm not. I am not touching the shoreline. These muskrat houses underneath is all water, because these muskrats say they cut holes through the vegetation to get up inside of these push-up lodges. And then when they go out of the hut, they in fact go out and and they swim off. Let's say, I know a lot of muskrat houses. You'll see some where the muskrats do actually build them on the shoreline. And if that was the case, I would not be setting any muskrat traps, because that is private property. I would never go on to someone's private property without permission. I always ask. Hunting, trapping, it gives the sportsman a bad name if they just decide to go on, because I know legally a lot of people can go on to private property unless it's properly posted. Like, they have to have it signed and dated, and they got to, it's got to be so many feet apart, for someone to legally post their land. So, a sportsman could just go on, improperly posted private property without permission. And that just gives us a bad name, and I don't do that, and I don't recommend anyone else does that either. But, it is within the laws. You got to use some, some respect, because it is in fact private land. But like I said, in this case, not private land, because I was not touching his shoreline. The man did get a fine, and I don't know exactly what it was. What happened was, the game warden was out there, and he was watching, or I met him, and he said, hey, do you want me to check your traps for you today? Because this guy was wacky. Like, if you would have seen the look in his eyes, he looked crazy. I was actually kind of scared he might shoot me or something. But he said, if you want me to come and check your traps for you, I will. And I said, no. I said, how about this? I said, how about you just watch from down the road, and if he messes with me, I'll just wave my arm or something, and then you can. Because he said, if he says one more thing to you about trespassing on his land, he said, I'm going to go give him a ticket for harassing a sportsman. I said, sweet. So sure enough, the next day, or that day, the day after the angry guy video, I went out there and I was checking traps, and I could hear his dogs walking down through the brush, and I thought, oh great, here he comes, and and I hear him yell at me. He said something like, I thought I told you to get off my land. And I turned around, I looked at him, I said, you know what? I said, I thought I told you to leave me alone. I said, I'm not doing nothing wrong here. I'm perfectly within the law. I said, the game warden that you called me, in fact, he called the game warden on me, and this is the game warden that he called on me, siding with me. So I just waved my arm. He said, what are you waving your arm at? I said, game warden is watching up there. He told me if you gave me any more trouble, just to signal him, and he was going to come and give you a ticket for harassing me. And then he didn't say another word to me. He just, but the game warden started his pickup up and was already headed down there. So I said, have a good day. And I kept on going down the shoreline. I got about a quarter of the way, probably halfway around the pond. I looked back, and the man was still standing up on the shoreline, just staring at me. And I could see the game warden. The game warden he was probably 150 yards from his house, and there was deep snow. The game warden, he made the game warden walk all the way through the snow, all the way down to the shoreline to where he was, So, I mean, the guy was a dink. He really had it coming. And yes, I I showed the game warden the very video you guys watched. I showed the game warden that video. And the game warden was like, wow, he's kind of an ornery fella. I said, yeah. He's like, well, if you want to, he's like, you can actually, in fact, press assault charges on him because he did, place his body on you. And I said, well, I kind of felt bad for him, So I said, no, I don't want to do that. I just, go ahead and give him a ticket for harassment, and hopefully he'll learn. And he said, you know what, if he does it again, you let me know. He said, I'll go back and I'll nail him twice as hard next time. So, the next day, I think it was the next day, I went back and I pulled all of my muskrat traps because, there's more muskrats other places. Not a big deal, but the thing is, these muskrats that I'm trapping, there were so many in this pond. They were cutting down, like the bulrushes were, along the shoreline were totally annihilated. They dig up under the shoreline, cause erosion, people's lawns, they cave them in, livestock. Talk to farmers, they'll burrow up into the shoreline, and then a cow or something or a horse will come walking, step on the shoreline, and their foot will go through into one of those holes and they'll break a leg, and then then they got to put them down. So muskrats, they are a nuisance, especially when their numbers get really high like that. So animal management, that's another big thing with muskrats, or trapping, I should say. And you can sell muskrats. They really aren't worth a whole lot, $1 or $2 maybe. You don't even make your money back for your gas. So I mean, there's no money in trapping at all. I do it because I just love spending time outdoors. My dad taught me, and I'm teaching my kids, and so on and so forth. It's a kind of a dying tradition, and one day it might die off, but not today. And so here's kind of more of the backstory. So 2 weeks prior, I had been out to this pond, and my friend that gave me permission, this man does not own around the pond. This man owns a small portion on a corner, and a friend of mine owns more than he does, even along this side of the lake. And there's like 5 other people that own property up on the corner of the lake. But I was out there 2 weeks earlier, and I had got permission from them to cross their property and go out in the lake because they asked me to go out and try fishing it. They said that they'd seen some dead fish floating in there in the summertime. So I went out there. There was about 4 inches of ice, out on the main part of the lake, which the lake is only like 15 acres, I think. But I was out on this pond. There's 4 inches of ice out there, but there's only like 2 inches of ice inside the rushes. Well, I'm fishing out there, and I'm fishing on her corner of the lake. Well, this very same man took a 4-wheeler around the gravel road, drove down through their property that I had permission on. Now he's trespassing officially. Drives right through their property up the lake and starts yelling at me, "Hey, you gotta have permission to be out here. Private lake." I said, "I have permission." He said, "No, you're not. You're trespassing." I said, "Hey, I have permission." I said, "You're in fact trespassing right now on the property owners that gave me permission to get out here." He looked around. He said, he said something like, we manage this pond, you know, for fish, and we don't want to, you know, we don't want everybody taking fish out of here. And I'd caught a bunch of crappies. I was nice crappies, you know, I don't know, like 9 to 11 inches, and they started biting really well. I didn't have a single fish on me. I actually picked my bucket up it out, and shook it, and I showed him. I said, I'm not even keeping anything, man, you know. And he said, well, you need permission from everybody. And I said, no, I don't. I said, you need to get off that private property. So then he drove all the way back around his house, down to the lake, and he turned his four-wheeler off. He said, how much ice is out there? I said, there's about 4 inches out here. I said, but there's nothing in the rushes over there. You know, I said a couple inches was, you know, enough to get me out of here. And he said, well, I'm coming out there. And I said, I wouldn't drive out here with that. I said, you're going to go through. He didn't want to listen to me. He actually made it. I could see now. By now, his lights were on, you know, and I could see his lights coming through the rushes. All of a sudden, I could see his lights going down into the water. I heard some bubbling, blah 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 blah, and then I heard his four-wheeler die. And then I heard him trying to start it. Couldn't get it started, so he must have got the motor wet, whatever. And then he walked out, and he just stared at me until I left. You know, and I mean, he was decent then, because I told him that I had permission. I wasn't keeping fish, and he didn't really yell at me, but he was like, you know, you need permission to be out here, and I had permission, in fact, and I was on, you know, what you could say is her corner of the lake, or their corner of the lake. And then it was 2 weeks later when this happened. I was out there trapping, you know, and it's funny because this guy was like, hey, he's like, I've lived here for 35 years and no one has ever trapped out here. The funny part is, I've been trapping that pond off and on since my dad was alive. My dad passed away in 1997. Let that sink in. 20 years. First time I trapped that pond was with my dad in like 1995. You know? 23 years ago. And since then, I've trapped it probably 12 to 15 different years. I trapped beaver on there. I've trapped muskrats. And I've always gotten permission from somebody on that side of the lake, you know. And no one's ever said a single thing to me, ever. I've trapped it for a week, 2 weeks straight. No one's ever said nothing to me about it, ever, 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 ever. And then all of a sudden, one day, this guy comes out and he's yelling at me. And I told him I've trapped out here before, and he called me a liar. I even offered to show him pictures. I have pictures from like early 2000s of me trapping beaver out there on the pond. But he didn't want no part of it. I offered to show him in my phone where in the law books it said, you know, Minnesota DNR law, it says that I could do any recreational activity I wanted to on the lake as long as I'm not touching the shoreline, you know, or the private shoreline. So, yeah. But that's all that. I was not trespassing. I was not, in fact, on any solid land at any point. On his side, I would never, and I'd never touch the shoreline. It's very important. I always ask permission from people before going on their private land, actual land. Yeah, I just want to cover those points about, you know, why I trap, and, you know, and that the muskrat houses are in fact not, you know, built onto the shoreline. They're by themselves out in the rushes, so on and so forth. Anyway, there will be no more update videos. I planned none. I didn't really plan this one, but then with all these comments, I just kind of was like, you know what? I need to do something here. So, yeah. Anyway, update to an update, you guys. Hopefully this gives you guys some, you know, I don't know, background that you want to hear. That's the whole story. Shabam. Yeah, peace. Thanks for watching.